Hello, thanks for joining me today. I'm going to be painting a misty mountain scene today with my watercolors. I'm using Artisto 140 pound cold press paper, and I'm going to be using three colors: grass green, medium blue and black from my medium set. I'm starting off with making sure that my paper is very wet, and then with those three colors mixed, I am putting a generous amount all over for the sky. Now you can see that there are no lines. I'm just going all over the place here. I'm going to be using paper towel to blot off some of the extra water. I did put quite a lot on, and I'm going to be taking some off here to give the effect of clouds. I want it to be a very soft feel at the end of the painting. Then I'm going to take that same color with the strong pigment and create the background of a mountain line. This is what you're going to see in the background, and this line can be anything you want unless you're copying actual real mountains, which I'm not today. I just want it to be a mountain scene. So now I'm going to take that same color again and just kind of loosely place it all over the rest of my page, making it lighter as I go down towards the bottom. I'm then going to drop in the same color but with a little bit more black added into it, so it's a tiny bit darker around the top of my mountains. My page is still quite wet, so the colors are blending down. The sky is actually dry now, but I want the colors to blend down into the mountain. I'm adding a bit more water. I do want to keep it quite wet. I'm using a wet on wet technique throughout most of this painting. I'm now lifting out a little bit of the colour just with a damp brush, going over it and then wiping it off on my paper towel. So I take out a little bit of that colour in the middle. This is going to give the illusion of sort of mist around the middle of the painting once we're finished. I'm dropping in just a little bit more of the colour. Did add a little bit more black to it. I just want to really make sure that the line of my mountains is definitely darker than the rest of it. So just adding a little touch more black. Again, my paper is still quite wet, and so the colour will naturally just blend down into the rest of the paint as I do this. I did notice a little bit of the paint had bled a little bit in the top, and so I'm just using a clean brush to lift up the extra colour. I'm going to come back and do a little bit more blending in the sky a little bit later on. I then went ahead and used my hairdryer to actually dry what I had done so far. I wanted to move on to the next step and needed this background layer to be a lot more dry than it was. You can leave this to dry naturally, or you can speed it up with a hairdryer, depending on how much time you have. So my next step was to put a piece of tape along the bottom of my picture. This is where the lake part is going to be, so I'm covering that up right now for me to do the tree line. For this next part, I'm using two of the same colors, grass green and medium blue, without the black in them this time, with a bit more green, and using a fan brush and making sure that there is a lot less water on my brush. I'm just dipping it in the paint and then putting it on for sort of bushes, and I just want this look of a lot of foliage along the bottom. So I'm just moving my brush around, dabbing it on lightly, and then as I go, I'm going to be adding a little bit more blue to the color and then a little bit of black as I go along, because I want it to get darker as I go towards the bottom, as you'll see. I then use my hairdryer again to make sure that this is dry before I go on to the next step. I'm still using my fan brush, but this time I've got just mostly black with a little bit of green on it, just to give a little bit more definition and a little bit more look of shadows. You really need light and dark in a picture to make it stand out and to make it look good. And so you need to make sure you've got a really good range of your lights and your darks. So I'm just adding the darks in here along the bottom for the foliage. So the next step is to put the trees in. I'm using a very fine brush for this. I want my lines to be very small. And on my brush I have black and some of that same sort of dark green. Those same three colours I'm using for this whole thing. The grass green, the medium blue and the black. And just depending on how dark I want it to be, I might add a bit more black, make sure there's more pigment on the paintbrush. If I want it to be lighter, I just add more water and less of the colours. And so I'm putting my trees on here, just a straight line down and then little lines across the side. This is such an easy, simple way to put trees. Make sure that you leave gaps between some of the branches. And obviously it gets wider as it gets towards the bottom. And so I'm just going to put all my trees on. For the trees I want standing more to the foreground, they're going to be a lot darker. I'm going to add a lot more black to it. For the trees that I want to be further back, I just make sure that my paint is a lot more diluted. There's not so much more water on my brush, but I wash my brush out and then I make sure that there's not as much pigment on my brush so that the colors are much more faded. It looks like they're going into the background then. The next few minutes of video are me just doing these trees, and so I am going to speed this up just a tad to get through this video, but when you are doing this yourself, obviously you can take as much time as you need. You don't have to rush the process. So here I'm starting to do trees in the background, and you can see that there's a lot less pigment on my brush. The colours are much lighter, same colours, just a lot lighter, not as much pigment on my brush. So I've washed it out and I've taken some of that same paint and just made sure that I don't have so much of the colour on my brush, so that the colours, you want it all to blend. You don't want the colours to be different, you just want it to be lighter. So it looks like it's a little bit further away, and it also looks like there's going to be some mist covering some of those trees. They're not going to stand out quite so much. Another thing to bear in mind is perspective. So when you're doing trees that are in the foreground and the darker ones, they're obviously going to be a lot taller. The trees in the background are going to appear to be a lot shorter, obviously, because they're further away. So think about the size as you're painting. The smaller you get, the further in the background they are. I'm now taking some of that same darker green and just adding some colour in along the bottom towards the ground. This is going to be the line where the lake starts. And then I'm going to take off my tape and get ready to start putting the water in. Just using my hairdryer again to make sure that this is all dry so it doesn't blend where I don't want it to blend. I'm then going to reuse the tape that I had used before and just put it on the top of the lake this time along that same shoreline, so that I can do the water without it coming up onto the trees. Going back to that original brush that I had used to put the sky and the mountains on, I'm going to take exactly the same colour that I'd used for the mountains and wash it along the shoreline. I am going to add quite a bit more water in here again because I do want everything to blend again. With the paper quite wet and lots of water and paint still on my brush, I'm going to start doing the vague shapes of the trees for reflections. These are not super accurate. They're just, honestly, just color, more shading where the trees would be. They're all going to get sort of blurry anyway, but you just want those bits to be a little bit darker, so when you're finished it does look like a reflection from the trees. Here I'm just lifting a little bit of color from the mountains. I thought the color looked a little bit flat, and so I just want to give the mountains a little bit more variation. And so I'm just, with a clean wet brush, just taking a little bit of color off in a few spaces. The bottom of the painting has had a little bit of chance to dry. It's not dry, but it's a little bit drier than it was. And so now I'm just doing a little bit more definition with those trees coming down for the reflection. So I'm going to do vertical lines and some horizontal lines. So now I'm taking the tape off, and you can see that the color from the lake actually did bleed up a little bit. But I'm actually not upset about that, because I did want to have a bit of a darker line there. I'm going to blend it out a little bit. I'm taking a little bit of the color off, and just with a clean brush and water on it, I'm just taking off a little bit of that blue, blending it in a little bit more with the green. But I'm actually quite happy with how dark it is there, because I did want to go for a darker line across there anyway. So the last touch really is to just blend those clouds a little bit more than they are. It's a bit stark at the moment. So I'm just taking, again, that same wet brush and blending the edges of the mountains just a little bit. I still want the edges of the mountains to look like the edges, but I also want to take a bit of that color and put it into the clouds. And, the whole point of this painting is that it looks misty. And so taking a little bit of that pigment and blending it out helps just the whole look of it to be a little bit softer and not quite so stark. And I'm going to do the same thing again with the paper towel crunched up, and I'm just blotting out a little bit of the excess color and water. And there you have it. It is finished. I'm going to take off the tape, which is always super satisfying. It gives it nice crisp lines when you do this, when you put tape around. And there is the finished thing. I hope that you have been able to follow along with me. I hope that you've enjoyed this, that it's been helpful for you and useful. And I would love to hear what you thought of this, and if you did it, how yours turned out. Please drop a comment in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.